YouTube, how's it going? The Goat House is back. This upcoming Tuesday, this next Tuesday that is coming up, we got a big roster cut day in the NFL. 80 to 53 players for each roster. A bunch of cuts will be made. There'll be some surprises out there. So today we're going through each and every NFL team, and I'm giving you some surprise cuts. I actually got 2 for each team. This was a tough one because I want to make them as surprising as possible, but realistic as well. I don't want to just slap some big names up there and then nothing happen. So this was an interesting one. We'll break it all down. This actually wasn't even my video idea. Somebody on our Twitter, we'll talk about in a sec, gave us this idea. So another good reason to follow our Twitter. All those roster cuts that'll go down, we will talk about them instantly when they happen on our Twitter. Got preseason picks. We got our Pick'ems League where you guys can join through there. Voting for games, a lot going on that Twitter. Link down below. Check it out. Like, subscribe to the channel. Full NFL coverage. Here's our Twitter. Shout out to Alex. He tweeted at me this morning with kind of this idea, and I'm glad I saw it because I see most people's tweets and I respond when I can, but I don't see every single thing here these days. So I'm glad I saw it because it's a pretty good idea. It's an interesting video. It's a tough one to make here, but it's definitely enjoyed it. So make sure you check out that Twitter. Here it is. Constant updates on the NFL. Yeah, Shaun Wade got traded earlier. I got grades right there. So check it out. Wasn't a big enough trade for me to make a video on, I thought. So, all right, here we go. We'll start with the Jets. So I have kind of a surprise cut where people may be, pretty surprised about it. And I got one that maybe a little more realistic, maybe a little less surprising here. But I went George Fant, tackle, who's kind of battling Morgan Moses for that right tackle spot. So that's an interesting one. Tackles are just so hard to come across. And Fant played fairly better than expected, I guess we can say, last year. They wanted to get better there, obviously. But they're so hard to come across that, you can't really get rid of decent ones with experience when you have them, because they're going down like crazy, unfortunately, as well. But you do clear a little bit of space there, but space really isn't a worry. So maybe that could be a trade candidate if they feel like, we got to move on from him because we want to keep this other player that's cheaper. Maybe we can trade him. It's a possibility. Again, there has to be some chance in my mind in this video that these guys get cut. So there is a slight chance for Fant, but it would be still surprising. Slightly less Chris Herndon, still surprised. Slightly less surprising, it's still surprising, but I think it's possible there, and they would save $2.18 million. How much will they feature at tight end in that Zach Wilson offense with the load of receivers they have? There's some rumors about Denzel Mims. Does Denzel Mims get cut? I'd be shocked. Go from surprised to shocked with that one, but we'll see. Those reports ended up, and then we're starting to say, people within the Jets organization saying that's really not true, but who knows? So we'll see what the Jets do here. These guys very well. I'm not predicting both these to be cut or anything. Both of them could be on their roster. So be interesting to see. There's going to be shocking cuts out there. It's tough to predict the shocking ones, but there's going to be some out there. Patriots, N'Keal Harry. And I think it's a little more surprising than I think most of you out there may think. It's not that surprising. N'Keal Harry. To me, I label it a surprising cut. You don't actually clear any cap by cutting him. They may take a couple thousand, 100,000 of a hit actually, so they don't clear. They clear $0. And he's looked pretty good in training camp, and he could be that receiver 5 perhaps, which is not ideal for where you drafted him, but it doesn't mean you have to cut him. Obviously, that'd be a surprise, but it's a possibility. It's been thrown out there a little bit. Slightly less surprising, I think it could happen. Jawan Williams, it was a second-round draft pick. I liked him a lot. I thought he had some upside. It hasn't really worked out. They traded for Shaun Wade. They're adding corners. They added Jalen Mills in the offseason. So it might be time to move on from him. He's made a couple nice plays in preseason so far. I still would like to think he has upside. The question with him has always been the deep speed, which is huge for corners. So he has the talent. He just wish he had a little more of that speed, I guess. So that's a guy that may be surprising just because he was a second-round pick. He had some upside, but it's actually pretty damn realistic that could happen. And somebody will pick him up off waivers. I can't wait for that waiver period, too. That's a mini free agency in a way. It's usually a lot of fun. Bills, go Mario Addison. I could have put Cole Beasley up here because I guess he's a little bit of a distraction right now. I would be shocked. It's another one I'd be just floored because that is such an important piece, a true slot receiver to that Bills team. I don't know. I'd be shocked, but yeah, I guess this morning he got after on Twitter him with Isaiah McKenzie. It seemed like they're on the same page. I know Cole Beasley was getting into his own teammate Jerry Hughes. I guess that's a problem, but I just don't see it. I don't know. Mario Addison's a possibility. They do eat some dead cap with this, but they would actually clear right now $2.12 million. Do they really need the space right now? The team feels like a championship roster already, but they have a list of pass rushers. They're trying to find that guy that would step up, but they got a lot of young guys in there that could do that. So, do they feel the need to hang on to Mario Addison? So it's a kind of a bigger name. It would be a surprise to some, but honestly, it wouldn't be that shocking to me. And then Matt Breida, really not that surprising at all. Just kind of go, there's not too many options here because, again, to me, Cole Beasley would be shocking. Isaiah McKenzie even would be too. But Breida, I think when the Bills signed him, everyone's like, oh, watch out. This is their next running back one because Singletary, Moss been – small sample size have been disappointing, but that just has not been the case here. Singletary is the guy. Zach Moss has upside. Breida's running back 3. Do you keep him around? Yeah, it's a pretty cheap cost. I guess you don't absolutely have to get rid of him, but I think it's more possible he was cut compared to what we were kind of thinking a month or two ago. Next, Dolphins, JAKEEM Grant, who's been pretty explosive playmaker for them, mainly returner. They bring in Jalen Waddle, should handle the punt returner. Should be a damn good one, too. They added a load of receivers, and Grant was kind of getting less and less action, I guess, in terms of the receiver position, receptions, reps, snaps. You clear a pretty decent amount, for this time of the year, for guys that are borderline players. It's a pretty good amount right there. And the Dolphins are kind of on the lower end of the cap space. You always want to be on the safer end and make sure you have the space. So, but yeah, such kind of been, a bigger name, not a huge name, but it's kind of been a solid player for them. So it'd be a bit surprising. Maybe slightly less surprising, Matt Skura, which they signed him to play center this free agency, but he struggled last year, and they kind of could be gearing elsewhere, continue on with the younger players there, and actually keep him. And he's listed as second string on their initial depth chart. Not that means a whole lot, but you do clear a little bit of money there, even though they just signed him, so there wasn't a lot of guarantees tied up into that. So it actually would. As people would see that and be like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. They just signed him. But, you look at it and, it makes a little more sense than maybe what people would originally would think instantly. Washington, Peyton Barber, who was pretty decent for them last year. They had that big 3 in the running back room with Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick. Barber was pretty solid, runs the ball hard. Jarrett Patterson, the rookie from Buffalo, looks pretty damn good. Going to be a cheaper option, too. He may be running back 3. I don't see them keeping 4 running backs. Patterson goes to the practice squad. Somebody may scoop him up. I think they like him. So Peyton Barber could be that guy. It really shouldn't be that shocking just based on what I just explained, but people will look at Barber played well last year. Yeah, that might be a little surprising, $1.32 million if he's got Adam Humphries, who they signed, which at that time where they signed him, it was like, okay, they're finally getting better at receiver, but then they end up drafting De'Ami Brown. It seems like they're getting better at the receiver position, where it's almost like it kind of feels like they're somewhat deeper, I guess, than where they were at the receiver position at the moment. So they can move on from a guy like Humphries here and clear just over $1 million there. So we will see. And just to recap, clarify, I'm not saying these guys will be cut. They're guaranteed to be cut, or either both of them, maybe neither of them will be cut. Probably bring that up throughout this video. But the Giants. Some interesting ones here. Yeah, John Ross, who they just signed. You don't really clear too much money if you cut him, so do you just keep him around? Galladay has an injury concern, but they're pretty deep there. They signed him, and then they end up drafting Kadarius Toney, so does that kind of push Ross kind of out there? We will see. You don't really save too much by cutting him. And Sam Beal, who was a supplement draft guy, there was some upside hopes there, and it hasn't really worked out. And they have a long list of corners there. So that's a guy that definitely can move on from. But I guess somewhat bigger names, especially when we talk about roster bubbles and the possibilities of these guys being cut. Cowboys, Anthony Brown, who is listed as their starting corner right now, but they did draft Calvin Joseph, who's looked really good and who they actually really like is Nashawn Wright from Oregon State, rookie. So maybe they move from Anthony Brown. The Cowboys actually could use some wiggle room in terms of the cap space. So $2.5 million. It's a possibility, but he is kind of their starter right now. And today, if we stepped on the field today, he could be their best corner or the second best after Trevon Diggs. Slightly less surprising, Ben DiNucci. Some people may be like, okay, DiNucci's not good. That's not surprising at all. I kind of get the feeling that the Cowboys almost insist on him. Kind of a bold pick last year. It's not, no risk in that pick, but, because it was a late one. But it feels like they're kind of insisting on him, and he has not played well. I think that, Gilbert or Cooper Rush are better off with either one for the second or the third string behind Dak, which is a pretty important role right now. So DiNucci could be cut because he just hasn't been playing well, but it feels like they really want this guy to work. I mean, they want everybody to work, but I don't know. I just got that feeling. Curious to see if anybody else got that feeling about the Cowboys and Ben DiNucci. Eagles, Zach Ertz. It's pretty borderline shocking cut to me. But it's kind of been brought up quite a bit. They do save quite a bit of money. We're talking about just right before the season starts. It's a good amount of money there, in $8.5 million. But at the moment, it doesn't really feel like they're gonna cut this guy. They're better with him, obviously. But it's a somewhat of a possibility. I would be pretty surprised. But again, it's a possibility. Slightly less surprising, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Don't clear too much money, but they actually it's a team that is pretty damn, they want the receivers to be better. They need them to be better, but they're pretty damn deep, between last year's draft, this year's draft, who they've added. Travis Fulgham stepping up when they got him last year. They're pretty damn deep. Quez Watkins is looking good. They're definitely going to hang on to Hightower because he's got some upside. So we're looking further down the depth chart, and those are pretty good guys to have further down the depth chart. There really isn't much room for Arcega-Whiteside, and he doesn't really, they rather have the speed. All those guys, everybody else they have has got incredible speed. Travis Fulgham, maybe, not the speediest guy of the bunch, but he's obviously got a roster spot because he's talented. But, so I think it's actually a very realistic one, even though they don't save a whole lot of money there. But teams usually keep 5-6 maximum receivers, so they got a lot of them over there. Speaking of that, the Ravens, I put James Prochet up there for the surprise cut. I actually, believe it or not, changed my, something I rarely do. I changed my my pick here. I had Miles Boykin up there, and I'm like, they gotta like Miles Boykin. He got so many reps last year. He shows flashes. He was a little disappointing for the most part, but I originally had him up here, mainly because I didn't really see Prochet because they just drafted him last year, and he was pretty damn good at SMU, so some upside there. But you look at the receivers they have, and maybe I could have put a guy like Tylan Wallace up here, who they just drafted. You think that's a steal of a draft pick, but he's no guarantee. So that actually may be less surprising, though, than some of these other guys. It's pretty tough. Somebody's not going to make that team, unless kind of a big if here. They could very well put Rashad Bateman on the IR after this next upcoming Tuesday, was that August 31st, that roster cut date. Because if you do that after that, put a player on the IR, they are not out for the entire season. They're out for 3 games. So you kind of save a receiver's roster spot at that point. So, but kind of looking at it the way it is right now, you got Rashad Bateman, Hollywood Brown, of course. You got Sammy Watkins, and then you have Duvernay, obviously their draft pick with Prochet from last year, Devin Duvernay. And that gives us 4. So then you have 3 more, Miles Boykin, Tylan Wallace, and James Prochet. You're not going to have 7 receivers. Some teams keep 5 to 6 receivers. So one of those guys probably gone. But like I said, what if they put a guy like Bateman on the IR? He misses 3 because he's going to miss those games anyways. So I think that's pretty damn likely. The reason I mentioned a receiver is because they're very unlikely to keep 7. Maybe they don't keep 6, but then it's a little bit of a surprise. They just drafted him last year, and because the IR situation, if they want to use that for Bateman. So the whole thing's interesting. We're going to keep an eye on it. Slightly less surprising, Justice Hill hasn't really worked out. They got some undrafted, low-profile running backs that are actually looking pretty solid, but Tyson Williams looking pretty damn good, I thought, for a deep depth running back. But Justice Hill, I still think he's got, if you just kind of give him the opportunity, I think he's still got some upside, but it's definitely a possibility that they can move on from him and keep one of those other guys. To the Browns, Malcolm Smith, linebacker. They added some linebackers, so he kind of got pushed down the depth chart a little bit. kind of getting up there in age. They can move on from him. And MJ Stewart, who they used a bit last year, but again, they've added cornerbacks. They add, Troy Hill's going to start in the slot, which MJ Stewart's better in the slot. So you save a little bit of money there with that. So I think those are both very realistic possibilities there. Steelers, I see a lot of people saying Benny Snell. Sure. There's definitely some possibility. I'd say a guy like Jalen Samuels, maybe in my opinion, maybe more likely, but we'll see. Because he was kind of that hybrid receiver, running back type guy. Got Najee Harris for that. You got the speedster McFarland, and then you got Snell that could kind of handle a load inside, in my opinion. So can move on from Jalen Samuels. And then Haskins, most people out there probably wouldn't be surprising at all, but I think when they signed Haskins, people were like, this guy could be the future, He could be, and sure, he had a shot, but I think it's very realistic that he gets cut, so it could surprise some people. Bengals, Quinton Spain. It felt like the Bengals offensive line was maybe a little better when they had Quinton Spain last year. They bring him back. Got like Jackson Carman, who's moving from tackle to guard from Clemson, or the rookie, looking pretty damn good at guard. So they could decide to start him, move on from Spain. Spain's been, I was surprised the Titans let him go at one point, so it can continue to be surprising surrounding Quinton Spain here. And their backup center, who they hoped to be their starting center at one point a few years ago, Billy Price, actually saved a decent amount of money, moving on from him. So some offensive linemen to look out for the Bengals, kind of moving on from them, and they could probably dip their toes in the water and in terms of any offensive linemen that were waived, cut, and then they kind of can get involved and try to pick those guys up. Lions next. Surprise cut Jelani Tavai, who was drafted a few years ago. I was not a fan of that pick. I was a little surprised by it. He's been pretty damn inconsistent and disappointing, and this new staff could be ready to move on from him, but still a guy people holding on hope that he's got upside. Do we stick it out? Does this new staff make him better? So it could be a pretty big surprise to some people. And slightly less surprising, Nick Williams, who's played pretty decent, kind of been an underrated player, going back to when he was with the Bears. But they've brought in a lot of new players. They traded for Michael Brockers. They Anwu Zarike they draft, and then along with Lee McNeil. So I love those draft picks too. But so they kind of could, and Deshaun Hand, he's a guy that can move around a little bit in the inside and outside. So Nick Williams they may move on from. I think a lot of people are bringing up Rashad Perriman. I think they're more likely to kind of put him on the IR perhaps because he has had dealing with a hip situation. He's probably going to be good to go, but to save a roster spot, he's been underwhelming, I've heard. So they probably put him on the IR, but we'll see. That could be a surprising one as well. The Vikings, Stephen Weatherly, who they brought back this year, and he was listed as a starter as a defensive end, so that's why it'd be a surprising thing here. But they got quite a few rookies, and they like Patrick Jones. They like DJ Wonham, who they drafted last year, and they re-signed. They brought back Everson Griffin now. So Weatherly could actually be on the way out, even though he's been listed as a starter. $2 million to be cleared. It's a pretty decent amount. Slightly less surprised. The Vikings didn't have a whole lot of option here, but they just drafted Cameron Bynum, so we got a rookie. You never like a rookie with some upside to be cut. It's always a little surprising. And I think this is one here. Because he was actually a corner, and the Vikings want to move him to safety, and that project has looked pretty bad so far. So I think that could be a rookie not making the team there. But we will see. The Bears, Desmond Trufant, they just signed him kind of to be that starter to take over the spot of Kyle Fuller. And I'd say most likely they probably keep him. But it does seem like they're insisting on Vildor possibly starting, but everything other than Jalen Johnson so far in preseason hasn't really looked too well on the outside. So maybe they will get in the season. We didn't really want to risk the injury with Trufant. That's been a problem in his past, in preseason. And then they start him. So it's a possibility there. They can clear over $1 million. So we'll see. Slightly less surprised. They actually just released. I was thinking about Javon Wims when I had this. We talked about this doing this video. It was weird talking with the other guys on the channel who are Bears guys as well, and we were talking about Javon Wims. And then moments later, Javon Wims actually got released by the Bears. So Riley really is another one. There was a lot of people really hyped on him, which I was surprised about. He was not Calvin Ridley. So and the Bears took him, and he's been extremely underwhelming. Just hasn't really been able to do much of anything. A little bit of special teams here and there. And they've added some receivers too. So he could be on the way out, but maybe it helps that Wims is already gone. Maybe it increases his chances of making the team. So we will see. Packers, Tyler Lancaster, who's been, for the most part, a starter on the D-line for the last quite a few years. A guy like Kingsley Kiki's going to step up. He's already listed as a starter. He's kind of taking over last year. We saw that majority of the year, really the second half of the year. So they could move on from Lancaster with the ability to save over $1 million. Jay Sternberg, who actually has a little bit of a suspension as well. And it feels like they have a long list of tight ends. We know Tunyon's the guy. And a young guy like Josiah DeGuara, could be stepping up in his place as well. So Sternberg has been a little disappointing. They got him going in preseason a little bit, though. So, but some surprise options. Some, bigger names than your typical guys that are cut, too. So we'll see. Colts, Sam Tevy, who they just signed to be their left tackle in the offseason. And then, they add Eric Fisher as well, but they know he's going to miss some time. They add Julian Davenport, and Tevy's just like last year, really struggling. And you have and the Colts actually could use some cap space, even though where they started this past offseason. So looking at compared to the other options to cut at that position, you could save quite a bit more money, with that one, $2.17 million. It really relies on how long Eric Fisher's going to be out, because, it's a possibility Tevy could be starting for them, but not too promising there. Ben Benogu, a couple years ago, they drafted him out of TCU. I was confused by the pick. It's not that I wasn't a fan of it. I was confused because, to me, he was just strictly a 3-4 outside linebacker as an edge rusher, and he never really just fit in with the Colts. So that kind of, that it didn't make. It made sense that it didn't make sense. It made sense that why he's not working out because I don't think he fits. So that's why the pick didn't really make sense. So they can move on from him. They drafted a couple pass rushers, even though Deo Adangbo's not going to play this year, most likely. So, could that save a roster spot? So some guys look out for there. I'm very curious to see how they handle that tackle position when Fisher will be back. Pretty important to them, obviously. Titans, they just signed Josh Reynolds this offseason. I've been hearing some other guys, a couple of former Colts receivers actually have been stepping up, looking pretty decent. And Reynolds has been maybe a little disappointing, even though he's listed as a starter. So I've actually heard some things that it's a possibility. It's be a pretty surprising one to people. They don't save any money either. But, again, how many receivers are you going to keep? Keep 5, 6 maybe. And then another one here, a guy that they drafted, in the mid-rounds there, in Des Fitzpatrick from Louisville. And that would probably hurt to see him go because they just drafted him in the 4th round. You don't save too much money, but I just been hearing other receivers have kind of been passing these guys up. So I think one of these guys gets cut. It's weird if we talk about Josh Reynolds. They just signed him to be their receiver 3, 2 at the time. Then they got Julio Jones, receiver 3, and he's been getting better, playing with the Rams. It'll be a little surprising. You think Des Fitzpatrick, they just drafted in the mid-rounds there. That'd be a little surprising, but I'm thinking one of these guys probably gets cut. I think so. Not a lot of money to be saved though, but somebody's got to go. Jags, Jarrod Wilson, listed as a starter right now. This will be a little bit more surprising, but they got quite a few options at safeties. They signed Rayshawn Jenkins. They draft Andre Sisco, who I like. Jarrod Wilson. All these guys feel like the same type of safeties. And Urban Meyer's kind of doing his own thing and choosing his own guys, moving on from other, so it wouldn't completely floor me. So we'll see what they do. And Taven Bryan, who's been extremely disappointing of a draft pick, realistically, you do think he would fit this defense a little more than the defenses they have been running. But they added so many defensive linemen for the better that they definitely could be moving on from him. Probably shouldn't be that shocking of one. Texans, Jacob Martin, who's been a pretty decent, rotation edge guy for them for the last few years. Doesn't fit Lovie Smith's scheme, so they could move on from him. Texans really don't have a lot of obvious ones here. Terrence Brooks, Shaheem Carter's been stepping up in terms of that backup safety behind Justin Reed there. That's a possibility. Could they move on from Eric Murray because Lonnie Johnson Jr. looks pretty good at filling in at that safety spot. So thought about that, but I don't know. There's not too many bigger name options here for the Texans, so I think these are more likely. Some people bring up one of the running backs. I didn't hang on to those running backs. I think they're trying to get a compensatory pick out of those guys, whoever they decide to lose, move on from after this year. They're probably going to keep one at least, so I didn't hang on to those guys. We will see. Saints, I got 2 running backs up here. I think one of these, it's kind of like Titans situation. We were just talking about with the 2 receivers. Both won't get cut. for sure both won't get cut. Neither may be cut. I think one gets cut. Latavius Murray, which would be pretty surprising to a lot of people. You save a decent amount of money in 3.18. They like Tony Jones Jr. He's really stepped up for them. Really, they developed him well. Surprisingly, added quickness and speed, which is rare. So they could move on from Murray and save that money that they could use, or who they just recently signed, Devontae Freeman. They could move on from him as well, $850K. So it's kind of bigger name running backs here. They're going to move on from one of these guys. I kind of, when they signed Freeman, I didn't think so. I thought it was going to be Kamara, Murray, and Freeman. Now I really think they're going to move on from one of these guys. So we'll see. Definitely could be wrong. They could end up keeping him. What do they do with Tony Jones Jr. then? We will see. Buccaneers don't have any big name guys, but they just drafted KESHAWN Vaughn in the draft last year. Running back, obviously, but they got a long list of running backs, so they got to move on from somebody probably, and it's could be Vaughn. Can he make it back around to the practice squad? It's be interesting to see. And Anthony Nelson, wasn't a fan of that draft pick a few years ago. Some people were hyping him up, but definitely doesn't fit to me. The Bucs defense. I think it's actually a pretty realistic one. They didn't really have any big name guys that I expect to move on from. Panthers, Ian Thomas may surprise some people. Don't save a whole bunch of money either. But they signed Dan Arnold and they drafted Tommy Tremble, so they could be moving on from Thomas. It's not a team that I don't think is going to feature a tight end, a whole lot. I thought maybe a little more than they did last year, but they do want to run the ball a little more. So, maybe having a tight end in there more effectively, I should say. But I think that's where Tremble comes in. He's such a good run blocker. And then slightly less surprising, Rashaan Melvin, who they signed. It is a little surprising still because Troy Pride Jr. went down. That's corner, obviously, for them. But, J.C. Horn, Dante Jackson starting, and then A.J. Bouye could be key depth, could play all three of those at the same time if you need to, but they could move on from Melvin. Don't save as much for like a veteran like that, though. Falcons don't really have any big-time guys. They just drafted Frank Darby, and a lot of people like that pick there in day 3. But I think it's a possibility. It's another rookie that gets cut, doesn't make the team here. $660K is not a lot to save. Then Quadri Olson, who people thought would be their RB2, now it doesn't really sound like that is the case. They moved on from Javion Hawkins. So, is Cordero Patterson going to be the running back too? I'm kind of curious to see what they got in store for us with that running back position behind Mike Davis. So that's a possibility as well. Broncos, Bobby Massey, who they signed to play that right tackle spot. When they signed him, it's like, okay, that's their right tackle, but now it's kind of like not so fast here, and he has that injury concern as well, so they could move on from him. Royce Freeman's really not that surprising. The Broncos didn't really have a whole lot of surprising guys, but the long list of running backs that they have, Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams, Mike Boone, they could move on from Freeman here just because they need that roster spot for somebody else. They already got roster spots for reserved for 3 running backs there, so definitely a possibility. Raiders, Nevin Lawson. They like Hobbs in terms of the slot corner position, perhaps, the rookie from Illinois. So that's a possibility that they move on from Lawson because of that. People will bring up Damon Arnett. They actually lose money with that, so that'd kind of be more of a shocker to me. Jalen Richard, backup running back. They did lose Booker, but they do bring in Kenyon Drake, kind of a better 1-2 punch there with Josh Jacobs. Do they need to pay the third running back and miss out on saving that $3.375 million? They probably cut him and say that they're actually pretty thin on the cap space. So they just traded for Denzel Perriman. Not a lot of, $990K cap hit, but they're very thin on the cap space. So probably move on from Richard. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Chargers, Justin Jackson here, the running back, who's been pretty solid for them. But they have a list of running backs. They would rather keep the younger, who they just drafted last year, and Josh Kelly, and they drafted Larry Roundtree. The new staff drafts Larry Roundtree, so they could be, Jackson could be that 4th guy there, so they could move on from him. And KJ Hill was just drafted a couple years ago at receiver position. They're pretty damn deep at receiver, so somebody's got to go. KJ Hill, Joe Reed, perhaps, could be Hill there. And then, not too much to save here, but they need those roster spots because it's a pretty deep roster. Chiefs, not too many obvious ones. You take a look at the offensive line because they added so many linemen and some versatile guys that they could move on from a guy like Wiley and say it's a pretty decent amount of money there, saving that 2.13, and then Already at $860K. You know, because you look, they drafted Creed Humphreys, probably going to start at center. Austin Blythe, who we thought maybe start at center, you know, he'll be a key depth guy that could play center or guard, kind of like what these guys have been doing. You know, you also have Trey Smith, who can play guard or tackle, but he's probably going to stick at guard. Played tackle quite a few years ago. But you get my point. You know, Remmer's pretty versatile. They got Kyle Long. You know, they got those guys already. So you got to see some options here to save some money. But we'll see what they do. 49ers, Mohamed SANU. You know, people look at their receiver group, and it's clear that it looks like SANU is their third best receiver. They got a lot of depth guys. I think they could be looking to add a receiver, and they move on from SANU there. I think it's a possibility. And Marcel Harris, who was a safety, but listed as a linebacker, you know, going into this year, you know, it seems like they got a list of safeties. I think that's due to injuries and injury concern. You know, Tart recently coming off injured list there. He's back. You know, so they could move on from Harris, but do they want him as a linebacker? Do they want to continue to work at them with both positions, kind of like a box safety? It's a possibility there. So see what the 49ers do. The Cardinals, these are some good ones, I think, for the Cardinals. There's some teams where it kind of just felt right. They're kind of bigger names, and they definitely could be surprised. There's some teams that's like kind of had to force some guys in there, you know, or they're not that surprising. So, again, it was a kind of a tough video. But Jordan Hicks, they were kind of looking for a trade possibly because right after they drafted Zaven Collins, and so their inside linebackers, Isaiah Simmons, Zaven Collins, Jordan Hicks, kind of well-known, was kind of get bumped back to the backup role and kind of looking for a trade to kind of redo his contract where it's tradable and it's cheaper if they cut him. They save more money if they cut him possibly. But Isaiah Simmons getting some looks at the strong safety position. You saw that a little bit in preseason. He's been doing a little bit more in practice. So does that mean they're going to value who the linebacker is when Simmons is not at linebacker? Yes, they should. And they have that guy, Jordan Hicks. So it's starting to be, at one point, this would not, you know, maybe a week ago even, 2 weeks ago, you said Jordan Hicks, surprise? That's not a surprise. It's more of a surprise now, but it's possible. We know that it's possible. Definitely a trade candidate for sure. A lot of these guys teams look to trade guys before they're about to cut them. We want to get something instead of nothing. That's why we see all these random trades going on right now. So all these guys are kind of trade candidates. So if they do cut Jordan Hicks, $3 million saved, but I'd say they should hang on to him there. And Devon Kennard, he's a decent pass rusher, but you have $6.63 million to be able to save here. That's quite a bit for this time of year. And you have Chandler Jones. You have Marcus Golden, who's pretty solid for them. You have Dennis Gardeck, who was really stepping up last year. You had a couple pass rushers in there. Do you want yeah, sure, if Kennard's on the team, he's a pretty key rotation guy, I suppose. But do you want to miss out on saving that 6.63 when they could be, you know, they could hit that waiver period from other teams dropping guys. They could use some key depth at the offensive line position. They could use some key depth or competing guys for starting spots in the secondary as well. And then maybe the defensive line, you know, minus where J.J. Watt's at, that's a possibility. So they could look to save a little bit more money there. So yeah, a little bit. You know, this video is kind of made for some of these teams like the Cardinals here, in my opinion. We'll see what happens. So there's going to be things that shock me for sure. Seahawks, Trey Flowers, surprise cut. You know, to me, it's definitely a surprise because they're thin on corner. Flowers looked pretty damn good a couple years ago, not so good last year. But they're so thin on corner. They even moved on from Pierre Desir, so that's why it's tough. But I think they're kind of going in the direction away from Trey Flowers at the same time, and you could save that 2.18. Interesting to see. It would be a little surprising, even though I have it listed, it would be a little surprising to me still. And Rashad Penny, who was a first-round draft pick, just really, man, I don't know if anyone's really doubting the talent. You know, I guess people would doubt that he has first-round talent. Will ever live up to that. But no one's really doubting his talent in general. I think it's just kind of staying healthy. And I think they do like DJ Dallas, you know, so they could move him from Penny, save that 1.36 possibility, but they could insist on him because they took him. And I don't know if that's really insisting on him. It's not, I think I would consider insisting on somebody if they should cut him. You know, I don't, you know, you don't need to cut Rashad Penny here. And then the Rams here, Kenny Young, who played a bit for them last year. Micah Kaiser was hurt though. It could be Kaiser and Reeder. in there with some young guys possibly stepping up. So they could move on from Kenny Young, who was actually involved in that Marcus Peters trade, don't forget. Save a decent amount of money, but it'd be a little surprising because he played a bit last year, and he's kind of, since they trade for him, they kind of been working him in, getting him going a little more, or they trade for him right away. You thought he might start, a few years ago when they made that trade, and he just didn't play at all, really. Maybe a handful of snaps. So, but then they kind of been getting him back going into last year. They played him a lot more. Then Greg Gaines, which I felt like going into each year, I think people started to hype him up as a kind of a sleeper guy to step up. It hasn't really worked out, and they've added quite a few guys that can play the nose tackle in there, so they can move on from Gaines here, who's been a little underwhelming. They don't save too much money, but they move on from Michael Brockers, but different position to me. It's different position to them, so I think that's definitely a possibility. There's a lot of guys, a lot of younger guys talking about the Rams. Look at Bryson Hopkins, who they drafted last year, because he hasn't really found his role there yet. They draft Jacob Harris, who they kind of fits that Stafford ball, the tight end, more of that move tight end hybrid. I think Hopkins could be that guy, though. So it'd be pretty surprising because they just drafted him, had some value on him last year. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Rams do. A lot of these teams it's very curious to see what they do here. And again, there's going to be surprises. It's going to shock me. And then the waiver period is going to be real fun, where it's a mini free agency. Teams are kind of scattering to get these guys, hoping they, drop to them in that waiver order there. So we'll have you covered on all that the second the news breaks on our Twitter. So make sure you check that out. There's a link down below. Constant football talk on there, keeping you guys involved. Like, subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on. We got a lot in store for the NFL season. As always, I cannot wait. So hopefully you join us for that. Be much appreciated. But that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.